Okay. Here we go. All right. Thank you, Jim Willis. I appreciate you being here, Ken. It's an honor to have you here once again. I have Jim here, for author of Ancient Gods, Lost Histories, Hidden Truths, and the Conspiracy of Silence. He's going to give us a little bit of his inner thoughts on it from the questions that we asked from him personally. I plan on having this as a great episode. So here we go. We'll go ahead and start. How you doing, Jim?
Good, good. Hey, Tyrone, before we do anything, I understand you
Yeah.
served in Afghanistan.
Yes, I was in
Thank,
Iraq twice and Afghanistan twice.
oh, thank you. Thank you for your service. That must have been a
Oh yeah.
harrowing time.
It was yeah, I actually was wounded my last tour.
That's
I
what
was
I heard. That's what I understand. Yeah.
yeah, and then I picked up this hobby of gaining knowledge.
Well, you're quite, I mean, I assume no one's going to be shooting at you today, so it's much safer, but wow,
I,
that must have been something.
yeah,
We're more
it
likely to
was.
be shooting at you today, Jim.
Oh,
Yeah, we got. Hey, I don't know if you if Ken ever told you this, but I know he spoke to you in the past. I got all the tabs from your books. I got a green screen, so
oh,
but I tab everything
I'm
that
in trouble
that makes
now.
interesting. I actually got. I went through them and went through the nice ones. I'm just joking.
Okay.
But no, I actually do that because it helps me go back and research what it is I don't understand.
Well,
And you know,
Tyrone, I really appreciate it. It's an honor to have somebody put that much time and effort into your work. You have no idea how much it's a boost. I sit out here in the middle of the woods and I write books or I talk on the computer to somebody, and I have no idea if anybody is out there, listening or caring about or anything. So this is
right.
I feel very very honored to see your tagged book like that. Really
Oh,
really
yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, I have three different colors because I went through it three different times.
Hey, but the good thing about that though, Jim, is like this book particularly, and I know you've written a lot of other books as well, but particularly in this book, I like to recommend this book to people who are just starting to get interested in all of these. Like, I mean, what is this? We're talking about ancient aliens, we're talking about religion,
Yeah,
we're talking about
yeah,
mythology, and anybody who's getting interested in any of those kind of ideas, this book kind of has all of that. Now, it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily go into detail in a lot, but
yeah,
this is kind of like the place to start, and then you get out your shovel and start digging.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've talked to Andrew Collins in the past about this, and although
Right.
I haven't talked to Graham Hancock. I consider both of those two guys, researchers. They're boots on the ground. They go out and
Right.
they do the legwork. I consider myself more of a reporter. I sit back and try to read as much as I can about other
Hmm.
people's research, and then try to synthesize it as much. I think both jobs are important. For a long time in my life, back when I was younger, I wanted to do more research, and I did some travel to Israel and Egypt, for instance, and
Hmm.
places like that. But now, to be honest, at the ripe old age of 76, looking at 77 square in the face, it's a lot more comfortable to let the younger generation do some of that work. But
Right.
there's a tremendous amount of work being done in this field nowadays about where did the ancient gods
Yeah.
came from, and you kind of owe it all to well, I guess we kind of have to owe it all to Eric von Daniken at the beginning, and then later, how can you ignore Zechariah Sitchin, no matter what the people, I know he has a lot of people who agree with him, a lot of people who disagree with him,
Yep.
but you can't ignore
You
the
can't.
the work that he's done.
Yeah.
You
And so
can't.
with
You
those
can't.
with those two, it all started. I even find it interesting that those books came out. It, it, it's following, shortly after Carl Jung's book. Help from the Skies, or I think you call it. He was, you know, a lot of people don't know that Carl Jung wrote a book about UFOs, as they were called back then.
Mhm.
You know, they're trying to change the letters now, but he wrote a book about it, and he was talking, of course, about the archetypal idea of people looking to the skies for help, and
Right.
this also came out at the very same time that back in the 60s, when Hal Lindsey's book Late Great Planet Earth came out in the Christian context, which talked about the end of the world and the coming of Jesus Christ and the rapture, where Christians were going to be taken up and, you know, snatched up into heaven. And all of this stuff happened about the same time. There was about a 20-year period in American history when all of a sudden we started looking to the skies. Now,
Yeah.
of course, we've been doing that for thousands and thousands of years, but it became, dare I say, popular.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it was just because for the first time, mass media was such that we were starting to be connected, even before the internet. At least, you know, people could read the same books and all that kind of thing. That could have been the situation, or it could have been something was really going on. Something was happening, and we reached a kind of a collective yearning to look beyond ourselves and to look up and to see something more. So all of these people from totally different backgrounds and totally different stages of academia, who probably wouldn't even get along if you put them all in the same room, and yet they all seem to say the same thing, and it became really a big deal. And you know, people say, well, it won't last. It's just a fad. Well,
Yeah.
it's lasting so far. You know, it hasn't faded out yet.
You're absolutely right, because you got shows like Ancient Aliens, and you have Ancient
Yeah.
Apocalypse and stuff like. You have all these shows and movies and all this stuff out here, and they, you know, I watch a lot of different shows with my wife on Netflix, and
Hmm.
a lot of the shows is it could be about witches, and they'll go back to the Sumerians.
Hmm.
It'll be about vampires. They'll go back to the
The
Sumerians. They'll
Sumerians.
actually say they'll say their names in the show. Lucifer, you know, they talked about the cuneiform tablets and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, when you watch these shows and you have this knowledge about what they're talking about, it makes that show just that much more interesting. You
Yeah.
know, it was already interesting because it caught your attention for you to watch it, but now you're like, hey, now they're implementing something that, you know, I have knowledge on, something that's a big question. What are these?
Right.
These
Right.
these guys, who are they and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I find it also really interesting that all this is happening amidst a background of uh, attendance at places like churches and synagogues is dropping like crazy. Churches are closing right and left. And yet people say, well, we're losing religion. Well, maybe so, but the sense of spirituality is sure up high, because people are still looking for meaning. They're just looking outside the traditional religious outlets that served them
Mhm.
for so long.
Yeah,
They're
well,
looking
that's the thing
outside,
is
they're looking in.
we're looking for an answer, and you know,
Mhm.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
established answer that has been, you know, spoon fed, I guess, in the last 100 years. We're like, well, that standard answer isn't really cutting it anymore. And it's
Yeah.
like, you
Right.
know, that's maybe that's part of the truth, but there's definitely something more to it.
Yeah.
And in the institutional establishment, they're like, no, this is all there is. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're just,
Yeah.
no, it's not.
I I think we're seeing a split between religion and spirituality. On my website, and I hope your listeners would go to the website. It'll take you to my YouTube page. The website is jimwillis.net. But on my YouTube page, I have I did a video some time ago about it's called "One Ring to Rule Them All." I didn't make that up, by the way. uh, but
It seems familiar.
the idea was at the back of the underneath all of it was that all of the religions that we call, you know, well, today, take the big five, for instance, you know,
Mhm.
Hinduism and
Yeah.
Buddhism, and then Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Um, they all began with a possible exception of Hinduism, they all began with a founder having what really you can only call a shamanic experience, a kind of an out-of-body experience or vision that is very common with American Indians, for instance, very common with religious experience all over the world, where somebody has a vision, an out-of-body experience, a shamanic experience that somehow takes them out of themselves,
Mhm.
and they try to come back and they try to express it. Jesus came out of this time in the was at least as the story goes, out of his 40 days in the wilderness, and he preached the Sermon on the Mount.
Mhm.
Buddha had his great enlightening experience under the bo tree, and he preached the Deer Park Discourse. Moses heard the burning bush, and he came out with the law of the basis of Judaism. Mohammed went out to the desert. While his wife was running the business, he had time to go out and meditate and meditate. And finally, as the story goes, the angel Gabriel came to him and said, "Write." And the result was the Quran. And these were all mystical, shamanic experiences. And then around those experiences came a group of followers who took a spiritual insight and tried to build a fence around it, and that's called a
Mhm.
religion. And I think the religion is kind of breaking down today. People are saying, no, I got to have more than this, especially the religions that are saying ours is the only way.
Right. Mhm. Or the
And
only one.
yeah, the
Yeah.
only one, right? And I think a lot of times people come to me and say, well, I've had this experience. This has been, I have to leave my religion. And I generally try to say, no, go in farther into it. It's all there if we follow it through. I've been reading the Bible again during this Christmas season. I try to every couple of years I try to read the Bible from start to finish, because my
Right, right, right,
my roots are in Christianity, so
right, right.
and I've been a systematic theologian for my whole life. And I certainly don't read the Bible now the same way I did when I was a fundamentalist or an evangelical or even a liberal Christian. I mean, I haven't even set foot in a church for 14 years now.
Mm.
But I still find in the texts a tremendous amount of wisdom and insight, and dare I say it, comfort, if you read it correctly, as and I like to say I take the Bible seriously. I don't take it literally. And
Right, right, right. I like the way you put that.
it's the same with so many of the ancient texts. They can teach us so much, because we make a big mistake when we think that these original authors were somehow less sophisticated than we are. They were deep thinkers. As a matter of fact, probably they were deeper thinkers than most people today, because
Mhm.
back then they had the time and the opportunity to concentrate. And today we're just bombarded by so much information. We can't sit down and spend years, developing an
All the
idea.
distractions also. I mean,
Yeah,
I
right.
mean,
You're absolutely right.
you sit down and read a book for 5, 10 minutes. Like I'll read a book and I'll find something I don't understand what this word is, or I don't understand what they're saying. Let me pick up my phone and look it up, because it's a great technology. Is great. It helps us out if you use it
Yeah,
correctly. And I'll
yeah,
pick it
yeah,
up and I'll search it in there. And then I'll be like, well, let me check this real quick, and then let me check.
yeah,
And I get
yeah,
distracted. And I'm like,
yeah,
get
yeah.
back to reading.
And I'm curious to ask both of you this question, because I've asked a lot of people the same question. The technology that we have nowadays, I mean, let's face it, in one way it's wonderful, because it allows
Mm.
people like us to talk who would probably never have met otherwise. I mean, we're miles and miles apart, and so it's wonderful in that regard. On the other hand, I find something disturbing about myself, and that's that I have a hard time sitting still and just being like I used to be. When I came home from high school, when I wasn't playing basketball with the guys or throwing a
Mhm.
football around or something, I mean, I'd put on a Brahms symphony and listen to it
Mm.
all the way through, 40 minutes of heavy duty classical music, and I
Mhm.
loved it. And now I find myself saying, by the time the third movement comes in, oh man, I got to do this, I got to do that. My attention span seems to be getting shorter and shorter. I watch a lot of YouTube on my television because my daughter hooked me up with a Fire Stick, and I watch a lot of YouTube presentations. And if I find myself with two titles that are the same, and one of them is 8 minutes, and one of them is 50 minutes, I'll go with the 8-minute one first. Just and I'm ashamed of it. I'm disappointed in myself. But have you had that feeling? I mean, do you feel your attention span actually shrinking in this modern age, both of you?
Yeah, for me, yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, like like I said, I'll be reading something very interesting, and I'll go pick up my phone, look up the word on that, try to get the origins of the word or whatever the case may be. And then next thing you know, I'm on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, everything else, because I have all these social sites for my website. Basically, I present all my information on, so I go and look and try to, like, I like to comment on my stuff that people comment on whatever post it is. So yeah, my attention span gets all over the place.
Yeah. I don't like, I will say though that, like, in your defense, Jim, I think that we do have to value our time. And
that's
so
true.
if you can learn about something in 8 minutes, then that's better than learning about it in 50 minutes. And then there's still the 50-minute one there too, if maybe you want to dive deeper into it. So like,
that's a good way to put it.
I really try to protect my time and what I'm investing in, especially when it comes to videos. Like, people will send me videos in a text or something like that. 9 times out of 10, I will not even watch the video. I'll just like give them a thumbs up or a smile or something. Ha ha. I assume it's supposed to be a funny video. Okay, I'll say ha ha. I mean, I have a little bit of a weird sense of humor too, so a lot of times what people think is funny, I'm like, no, that's not funny. But yeah, I think it's good to kind of be intentional about what you're spending time doing. And I mean, obviously you're doing okay because you're pumping out books. So
catching up to do.
It's a little worrisome though, because with a much larger audience out there that's not necessarily buying the books, but they read the reviews and then feel qualified to write about them. You know how that works.
Yeah.
But I'm coming out. I have a big book coming out in March with Visible Ink on American cults. And
cool.
I talked about the whole idea of cults in America, beginning back with the Pilgrims, who originally came here as the Puritans, rather, who came here as a cult, really. I mean, that's what they were called in England. And so we have a great history of it. Only trouble is I had to stop writing about American cults last September 15th to get into the publisher in time. It's coming out in March. And since then, there has been so much happening about some of the cults that I wrote about, and some of the groups and organizations that I wrote about. I wasn't able to put in this whole trial, for instance, that swirled around January 6th, and of all the different groups that were represented there and everything. So I'm almost a little bit worried about this one, because I've got a sneaking suspicion I'm going to start getting some flack. So as a kind of a antidote to that, I wrote an autobiography that was it's going to be coming out probably January and February. It's not really an autobiography, but it's the story of the last 7 decades of American history. Each decade had a kind of a different feel to it, and it's the story of a spiritual seeker and how he made his how he lived his life during those 7 decades, beginning back in the 50s, when everything was theoretically perfect. Everybody looks back to a golden age, which, depending on who you were, I suppose, makes a big difference. And then the 60s, and that, living through all of that, and then of course the 70s and the 80s and the whole .com thing. And each one of those took a different approach for someone who was seeking spirituality. So that book is coming out next year. And so it's and then Jan and I are self-publishing one. My daughter Jan is my colleague in my business and my next door neighbor and my best friend and all that kind of thing. And we're bringing out a book called Sabuko and Me about the spirit guide that I first met when I started having out-of-body experiences. And so that's coming out. So a lot of stuff's coming out next year. We'll see how it goes, but yeah, we'll find out.
Cool.
That's awesome. I got a lot of catching up with you because you do have a lot of books out there. I'm just so intrigued with this book that I have right here. Is because it's like Ken was saying earlier. When he recommends people that's interested in the field of these many theories, this is one of the best books out there because it literally gives you a bullet view of all these theories. Like you don't go in depth into it because you don't. I don't see you actually saying your basic opinions on here. You basically give people their an idea of where to start. If you're interested in, let's say, the Anunnaki, this is where you start at. This is who brought the spotlight on the situation or whatever you may call it. And and it's interesting how you put it. So yeah, I definitely have to play catch up with your books. I actually, after I read this book, when I did all these tabs, I actually started to do the research based off of your books because you gave me a pinpoint of where to find certain things. Because if you followed like Zechariah Sitchin stayed with what his ideas were, but you was given not only Zechariah Sitchin's ideas, you was given multiple ideas of where it possibly came from and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's and it's nice to know that these books have a shelf life. And I don't know when Ancient Gods came out. It was a couple of years ago anyway, I'm sure. But it's nice to know that there's no real shelf life on them. Ken, you'll be interested to know Ken published 3 of my books through his publishing company that were a trilogy based on ego, the rise of ego and narcissism in today's world. And they were based on 3 mythologies. One was Ken, you'll have to help me out here. One
Merlin.
was Merlin, and the other one was then Robin Hood,
and Snow White.
Snow White. Yeah. And I just got a call out of the blue. A guy wanted to do a podcast on it. I did one just a week or 2 ago with him. So it's nice to know that people are still coming into that kind of thing. But Ancient Gods, the great thing about a subject like Ancient Gods is there is no shelf life. It goes back a long, long way. And the whole idea about who the gods were and what were the gods. And as a kind of someone who had to write the overview on the whole thing, it's just amazing to see all the different ideas that are out there. And I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I agree. I definitely agree. It was, like I said, I've read it 3 times already. And I'm gonna read it again and again and again because, like I said, there's so much information in there that you can't just read it one time. I mean, you read it one time, you'll miss out like so much. Like you really will.
Tyrone, you're making me want to go read it again too. Maybe I'll do that.
Hey, I can advertise. No, but seriously, because when I picked it up, because Ken mentioned it earlier, and I think you said something about it earlier too. But Eric von Däniken was is basically the founders of the ancient alien theories. When we go to the ancient alien theories, he's the founder of that.
Yeah, he never used the term, but he is the instigator of the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. And then shortly after Zechariah Sitchin came out, and of course, like you said, some people say they agree with him, some people don't. I'm more of that type of person. I just want to see what the original text is. I don't go either way because I can't translate any of the ancient texts. So who am I to tell you what you understand from what you've read from it? Yeah. But I can only go off of what academics say. If they say, hey, this is what it says, then I'm gonna wonder, hey, where did you get your information and why? Because I want to understand what your ideas is. Because when I started my website like 2 years ago, my whole point was puzzle pieces. You know what a puzzle is. Everybody knows what a puzzle is. You put it together piece by piece and you get a full picture of what it was. And without the box actually showing what picture it is, every picking up every piece is more of a challenge because you don't know what to actually look for. You know, you already have that pre-notion of what the picture would look like when you buy the box. But if you just get random puzzle pieces from different places,
Yeah.
putting them together is
Yeah.
different. So, you know, I wanted to take puzzle pieces from everybody because I read from everybody. I have yet to share any of my opinions. Now, when somebody asks me for my opinions, then yeah, you know, I'll tell them and I'll be like,
Sure.
this is the reason why or not. But I try to stay away from my opinions because my opinions are going to change based off of new information. That's
Yeah.
just how it is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
Ken does more work in the original languages these days than I do. I used to do a lot more, but I discovered something through reading Sitchin that it kind of in a way almost disturbed me about myself, not what he was saying, but about something about myself. I'm going to have to. I don't. Do we have time for me to tell you a kind of a long story to set this up?
Oh,
It's going to sound like I'm not talking about what we're talking about, but I'll get to it through the back door. Trust me. When I was a fundamentalist Christian, and I'm talking 50 years ago now, I found myself one time in a real quandary about the texts because you know, fundamentalists have a great healthy respect for the text of the scriptures and the Bible. And you know, I read some Hebrew and I read a lot of Greek. And I was teaching the Bible as a systematic theologian, and I believe back then in what evangelical Christians today call the inerrancy of Scripture. And so I found myself at my desk one Saturday night working on a sermon. And I was doing what I normally did. I would get together a text from here and a text from there, a text from the New Testament, a text from the Old Testament, weave them all together, and then put forth this great thing that was going to change the world because the Bible says it, you know, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, it hit me that I wasn't preaching about God. I was preaching about my particular interpretation of a particular text. And when I saw that, my whole world just absolutely fell apart. I realized that all of the stuff I had studied the scriptures, and let's face it, you know, I mean, I knew the scriptures backwards and forwards. I had taught the Bible for years and read it over and over again. And it was always through a particular lens, you know, oh yeah, this is this and this is that, and that's what this means and that's what that means. But you know, you become aware after a while that there are discrepancies there. You know,
Right.
you become aware of after a while that you know, this doesn't agree with this. And
Right.
how many times did Jesus cleanse the temple? Of course, if we're going to take all four gospels into account, he had to do it twice, once at the beginning of his ministry and once at the end, and all of this kind of stuff. And I realized you know, I had taken a particular reading of the biblical texts and put that on the throne and kicked God off. And it really, it put me for a loop. But for a while, I thought I was going to have to leave the ministry. I really did, because I just, you know, couldn't see it anymore. And I didn't know any other way to read the Bible. And so it gave me a great sense of, well, be careful if you're just talking about texts. And I discovered over the years that this also applies to other ancient texts. And Tyrone, I was in the same place that you were. I read what, you know, what Sumerians or Babylonians, you know, said, and then I read what Sitchin said. And for instance, take the word Anunnaki. I knew the traditional academic, you know, definition of it. And then along comes Sitchin, who was one of, I think at the time when it was translated, what, 5 or 6 people in the world who could read the ancient texts. And he said, no, that's not what Anunnaki means. Here's what it means. Heaven to earth, come down, all that kind of stuff. And so I had to make a choice between the two. What do I go with, academic understanding or Sitchin? And because I'm kind of a maverick and because I found Sitchin fascinating, I went with Sitchin's explanation. But after a while, it occurred to me, wait a minute, I'm not even sure Sitchin is right. I'm not even sure the academics are right. We have to be, I think we have to take the texts as a great jumping off point. But if we develop for lack of a better word, a religion around it or a belief system around it, then we're doing the same thing that fundamentalist Christians do with the Bible. We're reading it in a certain way and saying, this is the way it is, and this is what the words mean, and all that kind of stuff. So I began to think, well, maybe there's other ways of trying to interpret what this all was all about. And it really was freeing all of a sudden to have the texts there, because the texts definitely give us at least what the original authors were thinking.
Right.
But on the other hand, just because they were thinking it doesn't necessarily mean it's true, So,
Yep.
so we have to be careful. It was a very freeing thing for me to realize that, even the texts, they're as good as they are. They're a wonderful source, but there's other sources. There's oral history, there's mythology, there's archaeology, there's common sense.
Yep.
And I think we have to employ all of these, or we're apt to go down a primrose path pretty quick.
Oh yeah, I agree with you, because it's amazing to, like you said, you had the academics version of the Anunnaki, and then you had Zecharia Sitchin. I also at the time went with Sitchin's idea, because that's the only one that I knew at the time.
Yeah.
I didn't know the academic one. When I learned the academic one, I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, what's the difference between the two? Because at the time, I know from reading Samuel Noah Kramer, George Smith, and Andrew George, their translations is based on their interpretation. It's their personal interpretation. And I know that Sumerian writing system started off based off of pictographs, which is basically pictures, something showing, just like almost like the emojis that we see today in text messages. A picture said a certain word, or it could be identified as a certain word and stuff. So like you said, it came when the oral traditions, when they started becoming from oral traditions to the writing system, it became those people's translations. So when Zecharia Sitchin came up with his idea, it wasn't until maybe like a year or two after I bought his book, The Anunnaki Chronicles. I believe his niece actually finished publishing the book on his behalf of work that wasn't published. And I actually learned that he learned the meaning of the Anunnaki while I believe it was in Sunday school when he was little.
Huh. Wow.
So yeah, it's in there. I'll send it to you after this, but I'll definitely. I was like, wow, that's interesting, because that means that if that's true, it's telling me he had interest in this when he was much younger, which many people don't understand. And at that time, the history of the Sumerians and Akkadians and all that, it was all over the place, because everybody was digging their hands in and basically trying to spit out their interpretations. And then later on, we have revised versions of what they wrote.
Yeah.
And you get a much clearer picture. So it's interesting to know that somebody else thought like that also.
Yeah. The texts, as you say, that they can lead us into a tremendous insight. But when we sit back and say, what really happened? What are they describing? That, for instance, who were the ancient gods? Right. We like to think that, well, they're either this or that, but there's actually, I think it's 6 now, completely different theories about where the ancient gods came from and who they really were. We know for a fact that between 40,000 years ago and 46,000 years ago, something happened to the human race. We know that because of archaeology. 40 to 46,000 years ago, in some cases a lot earlier, but that's generally considered the beginning of it, when these ancient shamans, these ancient gifted spiritual leaders, began to climb deep back underneath the mountains into caves that were dark and dangerous and dank, and how's that for alliteration? and they began to climb back there and crawl back, and it was dangerous, and they began to draw pictures on the walls. And, they came out and tried to explain what those pictures were. It was the beginning of what anthropologists call symbolic thought. So, okay, 40 to 46,000 years ago. Now, we know that human beings have been around for at least 200,000 years, and probably, I think it's probably closer to 300,000 or even more. But during all that time, from, let's even say 200,000 years ago until about 46,000 years ago, not that much happened. I mean, we were pretty much going along business as usual until something happened that caused this explosion of symbolic thought and art,
Right.
which 35,000 years later would lead to texts, religious texts and everything else. So we ask ourselves, well, what happened 40 to 46,000 years ago? Obviously, our species at least wasn't writing that we know about. There may have been other species. As you know from reading my stuff, I don't think we're the first species to come down the
Right.
pike. But at any rate, there's at least six different explanations of what happened. There are some people who say, well, one possibility is ancient gods that were actually spiritual realities, angels, demons, spirit guides, entities from another time, entities from another dimension. Or in monotheism, we have the whole idea about God, that this something happened, God, in one way or another, a supernatural being that we refer to as God, reached down, touched human beings, and said, go to it, go forth and multiply and all that kind of stuff. But there was a whole other idea. Some people believe that 40 to 46,000 years ago, something kicked off in our evolutionary exploration. And we evolved to the point where we could start to think different than other animals. As far as we know, we're the first species on Earth to believe in God. I've got my daughter has a wonderful dog named Lena, who's smart as a whip, but as far as I'm concerned, she thinks she's God, but I don't think she believes in God, But then there's a third thing, and here's where Sitchin, of course, came in, and that's what I call the help from the outside theory, that 40 to 46,000 years ago, something came from outside. It was either ancient aliens, or it was spiritual dimensions, or across somebody in some other dimension figured out how to step into this world. That sounds terribly heretical to Christians, and yet at this time of year, the Christians all over are standing up and saying, "Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King." I'd like to say that's a song about ancient aliens. It's a group of beings called angels stepped out of the ether, stepped into our dimension, and began to give us a religious message. But then there's another one that says 40 to 46,000 years ago, maybe early shamans somehow discovered hallucinogenics, magic mushrooms, or learned how to mix plants together like ayahuasca or whatever. And that opened up parts of our minds that before had never been opened before. The one that I like, the fifth way of explaining ancient gods, I really like this one because it's coming back into thing. That's the cosmic ray idea. I just saw a video on this last week that I'm going to have to look into, because apparently there are a number of scientists or geologists right now who are saying that something actually happened to the Earth. Perhaps it was a cosmic ray from an exploding thing that bathed the world in some kind of ray that we've never, energy that we've never had before. Or perhaps it was a shift of the Earth's poles or something like that jolted us, so to speak, and opened up sections of the mind that we had never had before. And the sixth way of talking about the ancient gods, I like to call it the gimme the beat boys theory. They learned give me the beat boys and free my soul, play those drums. I want to get lost in your rock and roll and drift away. We learned that through monotonous drumming, where they're coming over that same beat over and over again, that it can affect something within us. And these are all different ways of trying to explain where the ancient gods came from. All we can say for sure, we don't know which of these ways is true, really. I mean, we can all have our ideas. and I'm sure the three of us do too. But all we know is that the archaeological and anthropological record shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that something happened between 40,000 and 46,000 years ago to our species. And we don't know what it was. Were the ancient gods, did they come from a lost civilization? And were they just so technologically evolved that people thought that they were gods? Which is, of course, Graham Hancock has made this very, very, very famous. Ken has made it very famous in some of his books too, which is, and it's a perfectly valid and rational explanation. But again, and Ken will be the first to say too, I mean, how can we know for sure? Right now we can't, but that doesn't mean we won't be able to somehow. Perhaps there's other ways of finding out, perhaps through intuition, perhaps through meditation, perhaps if other people from other dimensions can find a way to get through to this dimension, perhaps we can find a way to get through to their dimension and become gods in some other dimension through out-of-body experience. It's fascinating. I just find the whole subject, really, really exciting.
Yeah, there's just so many different streams of evidence. And like Tyrone was saying, they're puzzle pieces. And it's great for Sitchin to show us his picture, but he's not holding up the individual pieces and showing us, here's this piece that goes here. He just says, here's a nice picture that I made. It's a great picture. But then there's all these other puzzle pieces from totally different fields. You mentioned do mushrooms, do meditation, play drums, and each of those things will enhance your experience of whatever this crazy thing is that's going on around us.
And I think it's going on. You said the magic words when you said it's going on around us, and we're just unaware. It's not that the gods aren't playing peekaboo with us or anything like that. We're just kind of dumb sometimes. All my life as a minister, when I was inactive in the active clergy, of course, I'd have to go to the bedsides of people who were dying. And a lot of times I've stood right there in the hospital room or in a room in his house or something like that, or her house. And I've actually held their hand while they were drawing their last breath and dying. And a number of times, I mean, I don't want to say, well, maybe about a dozen times in 40 or 50 years, I had an experience of somebody who actually I thought they were dead. The doctors thought they were dead. The machines hooked up to them thought they were dead. And then they would come back and they would open their eyes and they would tell me stories about seeing somebody at the foot of the bed. It was a presence or an entity or a light or a loved one or something like that. Now, I was a minister. I used to preach about the reality of angels and preach about the reality of Jesus and preach about heaven, all that kind of stuff. But I didn't accept it myself. I mean, I was really a doubter until I started, after I left ministry, and I started having my own out-of-body experiences and began to see some of these entities. Now I feel so ashamed of myself. I just kick myself because I could have learned so much from these people. It was right there in front of me. They actually saw something and they were trying to tell me about it. And I was too blind to see it. I didn't accept it. And I'm, like I say, I'm ashamed of myself now. And I'm also kicking myself for tremendous missed opportunities to find out so much more from these people who may have been just, they weren't theologians like I were. They didn't have, like I was. They didn't have a, great systematic theology guiding their life and all that kind of stuff. All they had was the experience of a reality beyond this one. And I wish I had listened. I really wish I had listened.
That's I think maybe one of the biggest problems in Western civilization right now is the way that we're thinking and how we discredit experience. Even unless if it's my experience, okay, I still might not believe it, but I at least, there's something there. But if it's your experience, then you're crazy. Like,
You know,
come
I,
on.
it's
I love the old saying that says a religious person is
yeah.
someone who talks to God, and a crazy person is someone to whom God talks. You know,
Yeah, yeah. God talks
uh,
back.
yeah. When God talks, when God talks back, that's proof you're crazy. You know,
Yeah.
and it's just it is sad.
Yeah.
It's a shame. It really is.
You know, that's what kind of got me on my journey. Visions. I talk about this a lot because it helps me cope with it. I know a lot of Vietnam vets and World War II vets never really talked about their combat experiences and
Yes,
stuff like that. And I
yes.
don't get too much in depth in it. But when I was wounded in Afghanistan, I had an outer body. It seemed like an outer body experience. Something happened to me,
Hmm.
um, and and then eventually I had to get out the military because you know, my wounds were taking over and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And but I started to have sleep paralysis. I didn't even know what sleep paralysis was. The doctors always called it sleep paralysis. I
Mhm.
tell them, I'll be like, hey, I'll go to I'll try to fall, or I'll fall asleep and then I'll wake up and I can't move and I'll start seeing stuff. And I thought I was going crazy because at the time I was on a lot of medication. I mean, when I got
Sure.
wounded, I was on a lot of medication. So
Yeah.
I always chucked it up to, you know, to the pills and stuff. So I was always arguing with the doctors and stuff, saying, hey, these pills are doing this and that and whatever. And they started changing the pills, but the stuff never changed. My sleep paralysis was that bad. I
Yeah.
started seeing things. And then I started learning about astral projection and sleep paralysis,
Hmm.
having a connection with the two. And then I started learning, oh, astral projection. So now I'm starting to, for like maybe the last 5 or 6 years, I've been practicing astral projection.
Yeah.
And sometimes I can do it, sometimes I can't, but it just seems like it's like a hit and miss. And I do meditate a lot. Like before, I never meditated. I have
Yeah.
Tibetan singing bowls, and you know, I meditate. I go in my backyard. I have a nice sized backyard that's really dark. I can see the stars and stuff. I'll go back there and pull out my telescope. I'll meditate for like 30, 45 minutes. Then I'll go out there and look at my telescope and look at the moon and stuff like that. And, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and I'll
Yeah.
have these little, you know, and I also was diagnosed with like lucid dreaming. Like my dreams were
Yes.
very, 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 very vivid. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's scary sometimes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all that stuff put me on this journey on where I'm at now.
Yep.
And when I read the Bible, I have the Hebrew Bible, the translation from Robert Alter and his commentary. I've read the King James Version and New International Version. Just like you,
Yep.
I try to read the Bible as much as I can. At least once a year, I try to read the whole entire Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And every time I get to something, let's just say Ezekiel, since a lot of this is about ancient gods, the Anunnaki and whatnot. Ezekiel's seen a wheel that can move front to back, side to side in any direction and stuff like that.
Yes.
But
Yes.
when he's seen this wheel, he's seen it in a vision. He didn't
Yeah.
see it physically. At least that's how I interpret when I read the many different versions, that he was going, he was in a vision like state, meditation type state.
Yeah.
And he's seen this wheel, and he was and you know, thousands of years later, now they have the Mars rover where the wheel, they actually have a wheel that actually can move like that.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, like you said, and with these dimensions and stuff like that, what if we are able to tap into things using our minds? Because
Yeah.
a lot of these inventors are able to invent stuff. Like I know a lot of these inventors seeing components of their inventions in their dreamlike state, and then wake up and boom, now that we
Yeah.
got this invention.
Tyrone, have you read this one?
And that's the one I want to get. That's the
Oh,
one I'm getting next.
yeah. You'll have to get a copy and read it. We'll have to get together and talk some more, because I'm sure we have a lot to share about this out of body experiences.
That's awesome.
For those of you who are just listening and not watching it, it's the Quantum Akashic Field: A Guide to Out of Body Experience for the Astral Traveler, written by Jim Willis. So I'm hoping that we can talk about that sometime, because I would sure like to plumb your mind, because just from hearing you say lucid dreams and everything else, I've noticed that the farther I get into it, the more vivid my dreams become.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm absolutely convinced that a lot of them are not simply dreams as described by modern sleep therapists, but they are actual out-of-body experiences. I'm beginning to think that almost everybody probably at some time in their life has out-of-body trips, which they have confused with dreams. And then the problem comes, you see something that's outside of our dimension. You know, we live inside a five-fold fence called the senses. That five-fold fence consists of our touch and our seeing and our smelling and touch, taste, smell,
Sight,
sight,
hearing.
and hearing. And you know, that's the basis of our scientific method. If we can't explain it, something that fits inside that five-fold fence, it's outside the realm of science. Well, spirituality is outside the realm of science. And the trouble is that language was used to invent what was invented to describe stuff that happens on our side of the fence. And out there, language won't cut it. You know, Ezekiel had that great vision. Okay, to him, it was as clear as a bell. Then he tried to come back and explain it. Try that sometime. He had to try to find words. I really think that each of us has a Rolodex of experience in our minds. And when we have an out-of-body trip like that, we come back and our mind says, well, how am I going to explain this? I'll just find the experience that you've had that's closest to it, and I'll say it was this. So we can't say, I saw this. All we can say is, I saw something that seemed like this. And then we try to explain it. And that's why we get in the Bible all of those tremendous descriptions of, I think they were all shaman. I mean, Isaiah gets taken up to the heavens, you know, and he's in the throne room and he's describing these fantastic beasts with 4 heads, you know, 3 of them are animals and 1 of them is a human. And he hears the voice of God saying, who can I send with a message? I mean, that's a classic shamanic experience. And he says, here am I, send me. The Apostle Paul had an out-of-body experience. And all he could say was, I saw the Lord, whether in the body or out of the body. He says, I don't know, but you can read it for yourself in 2 Corinthians 11. Ezekiel, of course, I think he was a shaman. He really was. And a lot of these, Moses, same kind of thing. They had these experiences. So, boy, stick with it, Tyrone, because you know, we have to keep talking about this. It's really important, I think. And I think I think somehow that through meditation and out-of-body experience is not a way to find the truth. Sometimes I think it's probably the way we can find the truth, maybe the only way we can find the truth. Maybe someday we will discover that consciousness itself is the basis of reality, and that each of us are little pieces of that consciousness that is enshrined or encapsulated, so to speak, within this human material body. But we are more than our bodies.
Yeah, and that's something we all need to explore more, because we've got so far to go on that. Like, we have little fractional bits of spirituality and what that may or may not mean. And then we have science, and then there's this big gap in between there. So I'm going to also recommend another book to read at the same time as Jim's Akashic Field. Check out, I think it's called Science and the Akashic Field by Erwin Laszlo.
Erwin Laszlo, yes, excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Those 2 books, read them at the same time, and they really work well together.
Yeah, Laszlo has done some great work on this. He believes that he's the one that began to make the term Akashic field popular. He uses the ancient Sanskrit Akashic, and it's I think the answer, Ken was exactly right when he said, the answer is going to be we have to evolve, but by evolve, I don't mean physically, I mean spiritually. The next great step of our evolution is going to be metaphorically within the human heart, I think. This is what makes me so upset sometimes with people like Neil deGrasse Tyson. I love him. I love to hear him talk. He's a great person, but he makes a great point out of saying that just because somebody says, I see it or I saw it, he said that's the least the lowest kind of testimony that we can accept in a court is somebody saying, I saw it with my own eyes. He said, we got to have proof. Well, at least when he says proof, he means material proof. And we're talking about something that I don't think you're going to be able to find material proof for the existence
Well,
of.
and there is, I mean, there's tons of material proof for all kinds of things that academics will just no.
Yeah. You're
Give
right.
me all the, give me all the proof. Oh, I don't like it.
Yeah.
Throw it in the garbage.
Therefore, it is not proof. Yeah.
You just, I just thought of something when you said bringing the material proof from a different place. There was a movie, Freddy Krueger. I can't remember which Freddy Krueger, but I don't know if you remember, but they was trying to bring a piece of him back to reality, and they actually did it in Freddy
from the dream.
Freddy versus Jason. They actually brought him back from from the dreamlike state that we're talking about, where he tormented people. So that would be hard to do, because there is no way to do that unless we go from different universes or dimensions or what. Or something like that. But in reality, it's really hard to take something in a dreamlike state or a meditation and explain it. I know whenever I do remember my dreams, it's hard to explain it where people will understand it. I'll be like, well, I dreamt something about I was on a boat fishing or something, but it doesn't talk about, I don't go into details how I felt the water and how it made me feel, and I was scared, and I was thinking about this, and you don't go into detail because you don't really know how to explain that feeling. Like you have, like sometimes when I have these dreams, it's like I'm living it like I am right now. Like that's how real it is to me. It's really seriously that real.
Who knows, but maybe that was the reality, and you are the dream of the person that was in that reality.
And I have read that so many different times.
Someday we're going to wake up and say, I knew it all along.
I was just dreaming the whole time. Now how do I know this isn't a dream?
But that's where I discover new stuff in even my own religion, Christianity. When I say the words, for instance, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. That used to be a kind of a platitude. Now I begin to understand, because in a way we're living by faith and not by sight, because we're going into a world that we can't bring anything back from that world into this material existence. It's on the other side of the Higgs field. It's on the energy side rather than the material side of the Higgs field, or in the Akashic field, the gift of potential. And I sometimes wonder if our whole life is maybe just a process of trying to get to the point where we will accept that which we know to be true, even though we can't prove it. And I'm not the first person to say that. The Apostle Paul said it. Isaiah said it. Ezekiel said it. Jesus said it. Moses said it. They all had an experience of something that was real and true and meaningful. And they tried to come back and tell us about it.
That's interesting, though, because the idea of living by faith, not by sight, isn't that exactly what Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying? Like, he's saying, I have faith in science, and because of this evidence, and I don't believe my eyes. I refuse to believe my eyes. And that's a problem, right? And I think it's the same problem that the Apostle Paul has.
And yet the quantum reality is really upsetting a lot of scientists, because it's one of the most proven theories of ever in science, and yet no one's ever seen a subatomic particle. You can't see into that world; it's too small. But we know it's true. So, what do we do?
Well, I've never seen an electron either, but I have a degree in electronics, and I know that shit works. So
you flick a light switch and the light goes on. You just accept it as a matter of faith. You're surprised when it doesn't, as a matter of fact, go on. So who is to say that we can't well, when Ken said we have so much more to do in this field, I agree. There are people doing it. Dean Radin and I have had some conversations back and forth out at the Noetic Institute,
Oh yeah.
when I've asked him questions about his work, and he's been so gracious to write back. The Monroe Institute, where, founded by Bob Monroe for out-of-body studies, is doing a tremendous amount of work in out-of-body work. And a lot of it is proven, and a lot of it is, experiments that you can repeat. The idea of helping people out, a psychopump and everything else. I mean, you can help somebody out of the darkness into the light, and then it's possible to go back and actually look into their records, find out who the person was. Did the person really live? Find the birth record, find the death record, and discover, yeah, to me, that seems like proof.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the, like, I mean, I'm not 100% convinced on a lot of that stuff. But I know that there's something to it. And to me, I think part of the problem that I'm wrestling with is just, again, it comes down to language. So the same way that Ezekiel had to use whatever words he could to describe if this was a UFO or a who knows what he saw. And so I see the same thing happening where, like right now, a lot of people are talking about these spiritual concepts and stuff that sounds a little bit weird, and they're using a lot of times sort of, they're borrowing words from science, but they're using it in a little bit different way. So when they're talking about like frequencies and vibrations and stuff like this, to me, I have a hard time with that, because I understand what frequencies and vibrations are from a physics perspective. And they're saying it from a different perspective, and they don't mean the same thing. So to me, that's difficult to jive. And I'm just getting caught up on what I think frequencies are. And so I think that that's a lot of times is that, some of this stuff, if I were to go, well, that's scientifically, that's wrong, and I can prove it. Yeah, but because I'm focusing on the words, they don't really care about the words. That's just the best words that they could come up with. So yeah, I think that it's difficult, because we have to think about when we're approaching any of these concepts. Like this whole book really is just all about things, ideas, things that have happened, phenomenon, and historical events too. But in every case, there's some kind of preconceived notion that we have, even with the word God or the word pyramid or spaceship. Like all of these things have these certain meanings in my mind that might not be the same as the meaning in Ezekiel's or Moses's or the shaman's mind from, like you said, from 40,000 years ago. What were those guys thinking? I don't know.
And it makes it hard, doesn't it? I mean, I find myself, 40 years in the active ministry, I find myself very hard to use the word God nowadays. Because when I use the word God, I'm almost positive that I know what I mean. But when somebody hears me use it, they just assume that I'm talking about the meaning that they have.
Right.
And
I know what they mean, but I don't know what I mean anymore.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Boy.
I'm glad y'all said that, because in your book, Ancient Gods, on page 9, you talked about Gilgamesh, and that hits me, because for a very long time I always thought the Gilgamesh story was based on facts or true, because that's all I knew. It wasn't until I read Andrew George's book, The Epic of Gilgamesh, a new translation. And in his book, he actually states, though the story Gilgamesh is certainly fiction, William L. Moron's diagnosis is a warning not to read the epic as a myth. Now, when I looked at the definition and origins of the word myth, All
Yeah.
it really means is based on a traditional oral story. It doesn't mean, it does have a definition. They're saying that it's fact or fiction is one of the definitions, but
Yeah.
that's not what it originally meant. Myth
Yeah.
meant that it was passed on from one person to the next, and then so on and so forth. That's what it meant. And
Right.
then later on in life, in our time, that's when they added another definition to the diction to myth, and saying that it could be either fact or fiction.
Yeah.
Or it could just be fiction, just depending on where you get your definition from. And
Right.
it's interesting because when I read that, though it's certainly fiction, do not read it as a myth. Now, when I don't read it as a myth, is you're telling me don't read it. From my understanding, is
Yeah.
don't read it as a traditional oral story, because I know I like to, like I said earlier, when I'm reading a book and I don't understand something, I want to know the origins of it. And
Yeah.
myth was one of the origins. So I go to etymologydictionary.com. I think that's what it is. I know it's an etymology dictionary online. I go in there and I type in the word, and it actually breaks down actually the origins of the word, how it came to be, where it started from, where they believe it started from, and how it became to where it's at today in 2022 and so forth. So I don't understand. It's weird because me and Ken actually had I posted something on my Facebook. Like I said, I have a lot of different social network sites where I post my information and stuff, because I take pictures of the tabs, and I'll talk about it and get other people's opinion based on it. And a lot of people actually asked, I should have told you this earlier, Jim. Some people asked me where to get your book from, so I directed them to Amazon, of course. But what I do is I take pictures of the page of what the person is saying, so that way they know that it's not me making anything up. It's actually the author's verbs. And I say, hey, this person said ramp. Remember I talked about Zechariah Sitchin, Ken, where he said that it was ramp. And I have the Robert Alter translation of the Hebrew Bible, and so I went to 28:10, I think it is, Genesis 28:10, and I looked at where he was talking about the ramp, or the ladder is Jacob's ladder, when he was talking about Jacob's ladder. And I looked at it, and it actually said ramp. And he actually says, Robert Alter in his commentary says, it was never a ladder, but a ramp. Now, the whole thing about Jacob's ladder is these angels coming from heaven to earth from a ladder. That's what the depiction is. They're supposed to be coming down off on the ladder. But when I look at that as a picture, the first thing that runs to my mind is, why would angels use a ladder go to transport from heaven to earth? From what I understand, going to church is basically they can just basically just appear, using their wings to fly or whatever. That's the basic knowledge. But every Christmas I put Christmas lights up on my house, and sometimes I have to use a ladder depending on the issue. And I'm just thinking, I don't even have wings, so I can just imagine coming down a ladder with wings. So I'm wondering what the depiction is. And in Robert Alter's book, in his translation of the Hebrew Bible, he says it's a ramp. Now, looking at the Mesopotamian ziggurats, I believe that's how you say the word for their pyramids. It looks like a long set of stairs that's like a ramp stairs that walks all the way to the top. And we know that in those times in ancient Mesopotamia, no matter if it was the Sumerians, the Akkadians, whoever it was, on the top of that ziggurat was the home of their god, of their chosen, of their city-state. So when you see messengers of the god from the temple, if you look at it from our physical form, our physical humans standing on top of that ziggurat, that god, king, or whatever you want to classify him as, sends his messengers down that ramp. So it makes more sense. I'm not going to say it makes more sense, because that's kind of rude. I understand it better. Versus looking angels with wings, coming from heaven to earth down a ladder, when there's other ways for them to transport. But if I was to look at it from the more physical form way, and try to see the other perspective of it from Robert Alter's side, knowing what I know about ancient Mesopotamia and their gods and stuff like that, I can see how those messengers of those gods in ancient Mesopotamia was walking down the ziggurat, and people down below was like, oh, they're about to send us a message, because they only come down to send us a message.
You're going to have a hard time convincing people, though, because of, it gets locked in with the silliest little things. Like, can you imagine We are climbing Jacob's ramp. See,
I
doesn't fit. It's got to be a
know, I
ladder.
know.
Got to be
I
a
know.
ladder, right? Because it fits the song better, you know.
Yeah.
No, but that's just
But
how
if
I
you think
think
about,
it. Go ahead, Ken.
sorry, if you think of in terms of the shamanic side of it or the Akashic experiences, um, like that almost sounds more like something that you would see if you were astral projectioning to a remote location. So
Mhm.
Jacob might have just been remote viewing and was
Yeah.
actually looking at a literal ziggurat in Babylon, a couple hundred miles to the north of where he was, and actually watching people walking up and down this essentially a pyramid, right? I mean,
Mhm.
so that gives us more explanations of what may or may not have been going on, which I think is good to have uh,
Yeah,
kind of hold these different stories in your mind instead of trying to decide on which one is right.
yeah,
Yeah.
Just which ones could they be, which ones might be, and then that gives us more puzzle pieces, you know.
right.
Mhm. And
I
does it change the story? Does it
yeah,
really
yeah.
change? Does the ramp
That's
and the
right.
later ladder change the story? And in my eyes, no, it doesn't. But how many words can you change until that story is changed?
Yeah,
You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well,
so.
that's I'm doing right now. I'm doing uh, a retranslation of the book of Job.
Mhm.
And believe me, that story is changed like radically.
Yeah, yeah. There are, that when I used to teach the book of Job, there are some people who place it relative. I don't know, Ken, where you place it historically. There are some people who say that it's one of the last books of the New Testament to be written. There are others who say that it's could very well be the first book of the Old Testament
Yeah,
ever written, very ancient.
yeah,
And a lot can change in the telling, and then translation. But I think, Ken, you're absolutely right, and you too, Tyrone, when you say having these different ideas, it's very easy to take these ancient stories and get them cemented into concrete, and say this is the
hmm,
way it is, period.
Mhm.
yeah,
And I think the important thing is to let them live, let them out, let them breathe, and see what the possibilities are. I really do.
yeah,
Because like you
yeah.
said
And so
earlier,
taking it back to ancient gods, I guess, like just look at, say, the pantheon from Egypt through to Greece through to Rome, because they're all based on the
Yeah.
Egyptian stuff. Like really, the see there
Possibly even
was this.
possibly even Christianity is based on the Christian stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff is become very formalized and very the academics like to categorize everything
Yeah. Yeah.
and understand it all. So like, um, Tote becomes the god of wisdom, but
Mhm.
maybe that's not exactly all he cared about, right? The
Mhm.
original, whoever this character was originally,
Right.
or like you've got a sea god or a fire god, and a lot of times um, we kind of, even like the way that we've been trained, if we had any training in mythology at all, it's always very narrow, like
Yeah. Yeah.
Poseidon is just the sea god. Well, they don't even tell you that he's also the god of horses,
Yep.
Hmm.
which is odd, right? But like, so
Right.
there's all of these things where everything's oversimplified,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
even I think even the fact of these guys are gods, I think that's an oversimplification. I don't think that it was necessarily um, a place where you go to temple and worship uh, Poseidon. I
Yeah.
mean, it did happen, but I think originally, I think that was sort of a institutionalized version of whatever the Poseidon story or myth was actually about
Yeah. Yeah.
hundreds of years or thousands of years previously, where there was something interesting going on, and a lot of that's gotten lost.
And it gets, a lot of it depends on who translates it to. I mean,
Yeah.
take the Apostle Paul. Here's a guy who wrote a third of the New Testament.
Mhm.
Um, and here, just look at him, first of all, geographically, where he lived. He lived right smack at the center of the crossroads. If you're going to go to Egypt by land to Europe, you go through what we know as Israel today. If you're going to go, if you're going to follow the Silk Road to China, there are offshoots that come right down into Palestine. So here he is living in this place where all of this trade is going on, and along with trade comes the stories that the traders tell. Besides that, he was born a Jew and educated in Greek and Latin, and so he was aware of all these things. Wouldn't it be perfectly natural for him to take a lot of these stories, the Greek stories, the Egyptian stories, the Babylonian stories, and combine them in a way that we know today as Christianity? You see a lot of similarities between them. And it could very well be that, and here's the Apostle Paul creating, I don't want to sound too heretical, but a whole new mythology that we know today as Christianity. Does that mean it's not meaningful or it's not real? No, I mean, it means that if anything, it's more meaningful because it has all these different inroads to it, and all these different streams that go to make up the pond that is called Christianity. So I think we make a mistake if we're afraid to admit some of this stuff and follow it through. I think it's a mistake. I really do.
But there is a lot of fear there because, I mean, you're right.
Oh yeah,
Christianity is highly syncretic. There was all kind okay, so the resurrection was taken from previous stories,
Yep.
previous mythologies and religions.
The birth,
The birth, yep. The Annunciation,
Yep.
the virgin birth, the resurrection. So all of these things, like there's literally nothing in Christianity that's new, that wasn't
Right.
already in another religion or thought process.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, Christianity does basically denies any of that. And if you start to notice it, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the real problem right there, is that why deny it? There's no, so they're afraid of the fear. So then there's this like fear upon fear upon fear, but none of those things need to be afraid. But there is a fear that is well-founded, because it's the control factor.
Yeah.
So the people in control are afraid of losing that control, and they rightly should be, because
and they deny their own faith, because in their own Bibles it says perfect love casts out fear.
That's right.
And rather than relate to these other ideas through love, and through a love of the truth, for instance, a love of trying to get to the bottom of things, as you say, we fear. And the last enemy to be destroyed, according to the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, the last enemy to be destroyed is the fear of death.
Yeah.
That fear is a pretty potent word. It describes a lot of what goes on in religion, because that's how people use control. They do it today. People want to control us through fear.
Absolutely. And it's not just religion, it's politics, it's economics.
And media stations. There's some media stations that they want us to get us to watch, to put their Nielsen ratings up. So what's the best way to do it? Say everything's fine? No, they say be afraid, be very afraid. This might happen, that might happen. Oh man, be on the edge of your seat, be scared all the time. It's a terrible thing, just a terrible thing.
So I wonder then,
and I think it's interesting too that when Jesus, and the story goes in his post resurrection appearances, almost always when he meets a new group of people, his first words are, "Fear not."
Yes,
because they were terrified.
He must have been scary looking. But let's go back to 40,000 years ago, when these guys were so let's take a look at these guys' life. So you're a hunter-gatherer, most likely. According to most academics, there was no agriculture at all until around 4,000 years. I'm not sure if I believe that, but that's the status.
Yeah.
So
generally, they're saying, Gobekli Tepe is pretty well accepted now. So they're generally saying 8,000, 10,800 years ago, something like that now.
So everybody, will agree that there was definitely not farming 40,000 years ago. So these guys are people who are very in touch with the animals around them
Yeah.
because they are eating them, they're hunting them, and they're being eaten by
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So when you're out hunting, I mean, I don't really do any hunting myself, but I imagine that there's got to be some fear involved, and in a good way too, because you have to have a healthy respect for the animals and even just the environment that you're
Yeah.
in, because there's a lot of stuff out there that will kill you without a second thought and can do so easily.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of life that these guys are living day in and day out. And then as some kind of timeout, they are now, let's not go hunting today. Today we're going to walk a mile underground
Yeah.
and crawl. And I don't know how long it would take to do that. Some of those little passages you have to like wiggle through. It's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
taking them hours to get down there, with a torch or whatever they had. Um, and and so instead of going hunting that day, they went delving down into the earth to do just some art, or like to do mushrooms, or like what are they doing? And
Yeah.
they end up, painting hands on the walls and stuff like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And I have to wonder, like, what was it really like? Certainly fear plays a part of it in that.
Yeah.
But I think that they had a healthier relationship with fear. It was kind of a day-to-day thing, but it
Respected.
was,
It was respected.
Yep.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
a survival tactic rather than a control tactic,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So then I also wonder if these early concepts of the gods, which, I mean, we don't know who the gods were 40,000 years ago, but presumably when we started having these kind of abstract thoughts, and we're started doing art and, using language and stuff like that, presumably, a lot of what was on their minds is survival and getting through the day, and things like, okay, what will happen if? And I think
Yeah.
that that's maybe one of some of the earliest ideas uh, about making up these kind of god characters, is maybe a way to deal with some of those questions, like, the god of the hunt, is probably one of the oldest archetypes of in terms of gods, because they would have been like having hope. Like, so now it comes back to faith again.
Mhm.
When they're waking up in the morning to go out hunting, maybe they started to do like a little ritual or a little prayer, or they would be, asking the hunting god to help them with their hunt today.
Yeah.
So to me, I think that there's, like, it's not a far step from that exact mentality and actual action, to what happens, with many Christians today, that still do the exact same thing when you wake up every day and you pray to God to help you with whatever tasks you have on hand for the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
So to me, that's such an ancient tradition, and that says, I don't know what it says to me, but
Well,
there's a lot in there.
it is definitely a control factor, and you can see
Mhm.
that this time of year. I mean, let's face it, the great God Santa Claus, he knows when you've been sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. So be good
Right.
for goodness sake, to
Yes,
get
yes.
rewarded. We use that over and over and over again. It
Yeah.
says something about us. It says something about us.
Y'all
Yeah.
brought up when you brought up religion, when y'all brought up religion, it was interesting because going back to your book, Ancient Gods, you wrote in there, and it's about Akhenaten's, I guess, seizures, like
Yep.
visions and stuff. And you said it may sound silly to say that an epileptic seizure marked the birth of monotheism. Do you still believe that? Can you go into depth with that? Because when
Yeah.
I tabbed that 3 times,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
was like, that's something that makes me think, because I believe it was also Constantine who had a vision of the cross, and that's what changed him to
Yes. At the
getting rid of
Milvian
all the
Bridge. Yeah.
yeah.
By
So
this sign ye shall conquer. Yeah. When I first came up to the land that I live on now, out here in the woods of South Carolina, I didn't know that it's an ancient site where people have been gathering for thousands of years. As a matter of fact, right down the Savannah River from us is the Topper site that has evidence of human artifacts that go back 40,000 years, which has
mhm.
really upset the whole archaeological apple cart.
I'm
So
right down the road.
if they were right down the road, then they were here. And we discovered, lo and behold, that we live on a quartz quarry where people have been coming to gather the blanks to make their stones. And we found hundreds of debitage. We found weapons. We found spear points, arrow points, all kinds of things here on the property where people have been coming all this time. And as they come here, I'm sure that they left a spiritual presence, you might say. And as I have been here and have had these out-of-body experiences here on this place, something began to happen. I began to have epileptic seizures.
Mhm.
And some of them were just not that strong. Some of them, a couple were really grand mal epileptic seizures, and in some of them I actually saw visions and heard voices of people and beings and entities. And I never wanted to treat the epilepsy because I know from dealing with a lot of people in the past who have had this kind of thing, that I know that if you're hooked up to an MRI machine, the very same sections of the brain that record an epileptic seizure are the very same sections of the brain that record a out-of-body experience. So I didn't want to take medicine to close the doors on epilepsy because I thought I'd also be shutting the doors on visions and out-of-body experiences. Now, I haven't had any severe seizures for a long time right now, but at precisely the time of my life when I was starting to have out-of-body experiences, that's when I developed epilepsy. I can't believe it's a coincidence. I think in a sense my brain was being rewired, so to speak, so I could look at the world in a different place and
Wow.
write about it in a different way.
And
Uh,
you're on land that's basically made out of crystals, because that's
yeah,
what quartz is, right?
I was gonna
yeah.
say that
It's
too, because you
everywhere.
talk about that in your book, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's rock piles around that nobody can
Yeah.
explain.
You,
And
you built
when
a medicine wheel, right?
yes, I built a medicine.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, the medicine wheel is in the valley down below my house, and
Okay.
every year, because I'm still a certified ordained minister, every year I get the computer printout from my denomination that says, what church are you going to, where are you serving, or whatever. And I don't go to a church now, and I'm not serving any church. So I started to write. I attend the Church of the Medicine Wheel, and I was sure nobody was going to read it. Well, 12, 15 years later, I'm still listed in the book as Jim Willis, pastor of the Church of the Medicine Wheel. So
That's awesome.
now that I've let it slip, you watch, someone will find me out.
Well, next time I'm in your neighborhood, you can have a service for me, and then
Oh,
there'll definitely be a church for real.
you would
I'm
love
down
it.
the road from you. I'm in Georgia.
There's the shaman. You'll have to come out sometime because you're close enough, Tyrone. You can come out here.
Yeah,
We'll have to take you to
I definitely will.
we'll take you to the shaman circle where I want to have my ashes buried or scattered when I die. And it's a very powerful shamanic spot. I'm convinced that down through the years, there have been people who have died here on this property or who now live here, and it's full of spiritual entities, and I believe that it's where I'm going to be when I go. But plus there's the medicine wheel, plus there's another place that we call the spiral, plus there's a place we call the Sabuco circle where my own spiritual guide used to chip out his he was originally a stone worker a long time ago, and it's pretty magical place. So Tyrone, you're close enough. You'll have to drive out someday.
Yeah,
I'm
that's very
definitely gonna
biblical.
take you
That
up on that.
Yeah. How far are you from Augusta?
Like 2 hours.
Okay, well, we're about 45 minutes north of Augusta on the
You know what? We'll make a plan for next year. Matter of fact, in January, I'm gonna send you a text message or email. I'm
okay.
gonna find out my wife's schedule, and I would love to come up there with my family with you. Just
Oh, we'd love
we
to.
gonna we will definitely talk about this.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, Jan lives next door. She's more she's even farther in tune with this stuff than I am. Um, and she'll enjoy meeting you too. So it'll be good. Let's plan on it. And Ken,
Yes.
you're only 3,000 miles away. That's
yeah,
not that
only.
far.
So I'm gonna come to that part of the world sometime. I want to go to New York. I want to go to Boston. I was almost there. I was very close to Boston. This year we were out in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So
Yeah.
that's the closest I've gotten, but we just didn't have the time to skip across the border there. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so Tyrone, what's another one of the tabs that you've got there on your list? There's so much stuff in this book.
This may have to be the last one because I'm kind of on a time thing today. But
Okay.
this is so much fun. I hate to call it off.
You know what?
Yeah.
You know what? Well, how about we do this? How about since we come back to this again? I mean, I would love to do this again whenever you have
Sure.
time. I mean, we can
Oh,
all just do
sure.
this again.
Just
I mean,
yeah,
if this
just
was
I'll tell you what,
beautifully great.
get a hold of Akashic Field
Mhm.
and give it a quick read, and we'll add that into it, because then
Yeah,
I can tell you all about Ken, you were talking about being up in New Brunswick.
Yeah.
Thanks to Google Earth, I was able to draw, just for the fun of it. I didn't plan on this happening, but it did. There is a straight line which runs from just south of Mexico, right in the head of Aztec country, the capital of Aztec civilization, that runs right up through Plum Branch. And if you keep on going, the Great Circle route, it goes right up through, are you ready for this? Here it comes, Oak Island.
Oak Island.
and winds up at Stonehenge.
Wow.
And
does it go to the Yucatan Peninsula, like Chichen Itza? Because I'm going to be there next week.
It's a little north of that. I mean, it's just
okay.
I mean, no, south of the Yucatan Peninsula. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But
that's cool though.
But it's really interesting. It runs right through here. And then there's another line that runs from my place through a lot of Indian through mound country, and winds up at the Great Medicine Wheel in North Dakota, which is also the Great Bend Medicine Wheel. So
cool.
It's a pretty spiritual place. I'm sure you both love it.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll buy the book probably next week. I'll get the book and I'll read it. It takes me like 2 days to read a book, so I'll probably read it like 3 times. So it'll probably take me like a week to read it 3 times, because I want to get as much information as I can. And I'll email both you and Ken. Me and Ken talk about continually doing this whenever we have similar interests and stuff like that. So
make sure to contact me through my daughter Jan, because she sets up the schedule and everything else. But I guess you've got Jan's email, right? So
we've got her.
Yeah, you can contact her, and then she sets up all that stuff for me.
Okay. Yeah. Because if you're in a rush, I would have been happy with just 5 minutes of your time, because I'm telling you, I really admire your work, and
thank you.
I'm a big fan of yours. And
thank you very much.
I have to apologize to Ken too, because Ken, I got to tell you something. About a week ago, I was sitting down. I was telling my wife, "Hey, I got this really good podcast interview with Jim Willis and Ken Goudsward," and she was like, "Oh, that's cool." She was like, "I know you talk about it a lot," but I said, "You know what, babe? You know what's so funny? I was on Amazon, and I was actually I was looking up a book to buy, the Enuma Elish, and I was like, I had it saved in my cart." And I have to apologize. It was your book. I didn't know you had that many books. I know I did research on you, but
Yeah.
you're on IMDb. You're on all kinds of places. Like I knew who you were, but I didn't really dig deep like I should have done. And I want to apologize because when we did that interview, I didn't know that I was a fan of yours like that either. The name was I'm not good with names. I remember faces, but I was just like, wow, Ken. I
wrote
man.
a squib for that, didn't I? Was it?
Yes, you did.
Yeah,
yeah.
So
and
you're out there too. No, like you got people out there that really admire your work too, Ken. Like I don't put names together too well. I'm good with pictures and stuff like that. I guess you could say that if I was somebody that had to describe a picture, I want to tell you in detail. But, I have to apologize because I did not know that. You know, you guys are giving me opportunities, like you said when we first started this, and I'm not going to make this long. We probably would never had this discussion if we didn't have this technology because I mean we're all from 3 different sides of the world. Yeah. We're all on 3 different sides of our mentalities and our experience in our lives. And just to be able to sit here to talk with, because I never read books before when I was a little kid. I hated books when I was a little kid. Now I got books all over the place and I got a Kindle and all kinds of stuff. And I read so much that it's like, it's the opposite. It's the total opposite. So it's just amazing that I get to interact with the authors that I admire. And I have to say, I admire both of you guys. And I really appreciate you both giving me this opportunity. I really do.
Thank you. This was our pleasure. I'm sure I can speak for Ken too, that this was fun, Tyrone. We'll plan on doing it again.
All right.
Definitely.
All right.
Okay.
Well, you guys have a good day.
Thank you so much. We'll see you both now.
All right. Take care.
Bye now.
See ya.